Hey guys, and welcome to this edition of Scruff's Garage. Today in the garage I have my 2010 Ford F150. This is my daily driver. I don't drive the Corvette every day, obviously. But a couple of weeks ago, the rear brakes, I started noticing a grinding noise. And I've had the truck, I bought it pre-owned, but I've had it myself over 90,000 miles. And I had not replaced the rear brakes, hadn't had a need to. But once they started making that grinding noise, I figured something was up. So I decided, I went ahead and bought brakes, and then I was going to dive into it today and take a look and see what's going on. I already ran through the passenger side because I wanted to do a dry run before I filmed it. And I figured out why they were grinding so bad. I don't know if you can see. You see that on camera? There is no brake pad left. That is completely gone. I can't believe it wasn't making more noise thousands of miles ago. Don't know why, but it wasn't until it got down to metal on metal that it started making a horrendous grinding noise right before I came to a stop. So, be that as it may, it's obviously time for new brakes. So what I decided to go with for my truck, there are a lot of brake pads and rotors that you can go with. Whatever flavor suits you obviously will work. I went with the Motorcraft brake pads. They seem to be of decent quality. They come with the slide rails that these will slide back and forth on. I'll show you where these go when we get over to the vehicle. And then for the rotors, I also went with the Motorcraft rotors, and I got the coated rotors. Given a choice, I prefer coated rotors. My second choice would be painted rotors, where they paint the hat, and then just bare steel. Obviously, they don't make coated rotors for everything. And even though I'm in the south and we don't get a lot of road salt and stuff because it doesn't snow down here that often, corrosion is not that big of an issue, but the coated rotors are nice. It gives a layer of anti-corrosion protection everywhere on the rotor. They typically actually dip these, so it even gets down inside the vanes if it's a vented rotor. It's inside, and then of course the first time the brake pads wear on the friction surface, it rubs it off, and it doesn't contaminate the friction surface, so no concerns there. So anyway, that's what I decided to go with, the Motorcraft pads and rotors. I think these will do pretty well, though I'll let you know after I've got some miles on them. If I have any issues, I'll always follow down in the comments, and I'll give an update. So let's dive in. I'll show you the process. Honestly, these rear brakes are super easy. But I'll walk through it, so if it's your first time seeing how these brakes go together, you don't run into any surprises. So come on, let's check it out. Okay, so we're over here in the driver's rear wheel well. Obviously, I've already got the truck lifted up off the ground. It's on jack stands, tires and wheels are off, that sort of thing. So at this point, right, we're ready to start taking apart the brakes. If you're like me, the first thing you see is this thingamabob, and you think, what the heck is that, and do I have to do anything special with it? A little bit of research suggests that this is some type of noise suppression, vibration dampener that Ford engineered into the rear brakes, maybe to help with alleviate some sort of a noise problem they had at some point. There are no wires going to it, and honestly, we don't have to do anything with it, at least for the purposes of this job. Don't twist on it. You'll see that it's, if you move it a little bit, it's on some sort of a rubber bushing. So don't twist it, otherwise you'll break it. But there is a wrench flat right here for a 10mm wrench, and then all we have to do is loosen it. We're going to back this up a little bit. On the passenger side, I couldn't get it all the way out with it in place. We'll rotate the brake caliper, and then we'll be able to get this all the way out. But there we go. And the whole thing will come out. Yeah, see, as soon as you get it loose. And it's worth noting right from the beginning that this 10mm bolt, right, these are the caliper slide bolts, was not in there very tight. So when we go back to put these together, yeah, see, it won't come out quite all the way out. We'll be sure not to go particularly tight with these. They're just a 10mm bolt. We don't want to damage anything. The second bolt is down here. You can see my finger. Same thing, 10mm. There we go. Right, so he comes out. Okay, where you can see it. And I'm fortunate I'm in an area where I don't get a lot of rust and corrosion, so the bolts coming out look really nice and clean. And always keep a magnetic tray handy so that I can put the bolts in there and don't have to worry about them rolling away. There we go, and we can just pry the caliper up. I don't know if you can see. No. Yeah, as you go to pry this up, there's a little spring here built onto the side of the outboard pad. You may have to press that in just a bit to get it to go past, right? So as you pry this way, kind of press in on that spring, and then you can pry this out. Of course, make sure the bolts are out of the way, or it's not going to go far at all. There we go. And he can come out the rest of the way. And then, so you can see I still had a little bit of brake pads left on this side, but the passenger side inboard was completely shot. So while we're at this, we'll go ahead and pry out this pad if we can. There we go. And if you're having a hard time getting the pad out, there's these two little notches, one there and one on this side. If I can get my fingers out of the way, they fit into these two notches on the caliper and are kind of what hold the pad in place and keep it from shifting, but can make it a little tricky getting it out. And before I take this pad out, I'm going to go ahead and compress in my caliper piston. And now this inboard pad, there are 3 springs on the back side of this. There we go. Just pop it out. You can see those 3 springs are what hold it into the center of the brake caliper. So drop out any junk, and then got a bungee cord. Yeah, there you go. So I just wrap a little bungee cord around the rear leaf spring, and that will support the brake caliper while we work on the rest of the system. Don't let this dangle just by the rubber brake hose. You could tear it or stretch it. Obviously, that would be a bad thing. One nice thing about this rear brake setup is that you don't have to remove this caliper bracket to get the rotor off. The way those slide pins are set up, we can get this rotor off without having to take this bracket off, which saves us quite a bit of time. There we go. These are the slides that the pads will slide on in and out. There's this little metal cap slide here. Like I said, the brake pads came with new ones, so we're going to remove these. Just hit it with a long screwdriver and a hammer, and you can knock them off, and then we'll clean up this area. Okay, we're going to take a little wire brush. I'm going to clean up these areas, any corrosion that was under these little slides. Get that cleaned up, and then I'm going to just a general cleanup. I got a couple of cans of brake cleaner. So we're just going to clean this area up, any brake dust or corrosion that's caught up in there. I like to spray out all the springs and the adjusters and all that sort of thing that build up, inside of the brakes. The other thing that's important to do, these boots and the pins that go inside are what your caliper floats on. So you want to make sure that they float smoothly. So inspect the boots, make sure they're not torn. If it is, obviously you need to get a replacement. You can push these pins out. If you just keep pushing, they'll come all the way out. And you can re-lubricate if you need to. Mine are in great condition, so I'm not going to take them apart. There's not a benefit to doing so, so I'm going to leave the boots as they are because I don't have replacements, and if I try to take it apart and I tear the boot, then I've only made matters worse. So, but do definitely inspect them and make sure that they float and slide as they should. Okay, now that we've got things cleaned up, we're ready to start reassembling. I apologize for the airplane noise in the background if you can hear that. I live not too far from the airport. But anyway, like I said, the brake pads came with these new slide rails. They fit here. They are a snug fit. So I've found that you need a hammer to get them to fit on there. Okay, for the next step in the reassembly, I like to use a little bit of, this is a ceramic brake parts lubricant. It's a brake grease on the friction surfaces, well, not slab points. Obviously keep it off the friction surfaces like the brake pads, but where the pads slide on the bracket, and then we'll also do a little bit on the caliper. I'll show you where we can put a little bit there. It doesn't take much, but it just helps keep anything from sticking and causing a little bit of a vibration or noise. And I like to use these little disposable paint brushes. You can get a 100 pack for $1. It's a little easier than using the brush that comes in here. Like I said, we'll just apply a little bit. Then we can also do a little bit on the brake caliper. We'll do here some on the piston face, and then we can do a little bit where the back of the pad will ride. There we go. Pretty easy. Like I said, it doesn't take much, just a very thin layer. Obviously there's not a lot of clearance in there, so if you gob a whole bunch of it in there, it's just going to push out, and it may get on a surface that you don't want it on. So don't go overkill with this stuff. Okay, we're ready to put our pads into place. We'll start with the inboard pad. As we noted when we took it off, it's got these three spring clips that hold it into the center of the caliper piston. Of course, make sure you get your orientation correct. Goes this way, not this way. If you try that, it's not going to work. There we go. That fits into place. And then for the outboard pad, make sure you pay attention and match it up with what came off of the side that you're working on. The spring tab goes towards the top, so this is the one for the driver's side, but make sure you're paying attention and get those lined up as they should be. As we noted again, as we were taking it off, make sure those centering pins line up in the holes, and then this should all be where it needs to be. Hang that to the side, and we'll put our brake rotor in place. Alright, got our brake rotor in place. Of course, when you take a new rotor out of the box, take a lint-free paper towel and a can of brake cleaner, and make sure you clean off the friction surface. It's not such a big issue on the coated rotors, right? Because obviously they already have a anti-corrosive coating on them. But other rotors, bare steel rotors, or the painted rotors where the friction surface is bare, they typically apply a light coating of oil so that they don't have any corrosion during shipping and storage and before it gets sold to you. So make sure you clean that off. And of course, with these being rear brakes with the integrated parking drum, make sure you clean off that friction surface as well. So we're ready to hang our brake caliper. You have to pull the slide pins back so that they clear the caliper bracket. And then, like I said, this spring, there we go. And then, of course, always start your bolts by hand. You don't want to cross thread anything. And then before I go too far, go. Be sure to put in this top one since it's longer. Go. Okay, there we go. Remember, when we took these out, these weren't particularly tight. It's just a 10mm bolt, so don't go crazy. When you tighten these are not some 100 foot-pound kind of bolt. Okay, and that's how it should look when you're done. Brake caliper back in place. We got our new rotor. You can adjust your parking brake if you have a need to do that. And then, of course, put your tire and wheel back on. And then the lug nut Torx back, at least on my truck, like I said, it's the 2010, is 150 foot-pounds, which is pretty tight for a lug nut spec, but that's what it is. So we'll get the torque wrench out and make sure those are set correctly. Then, of course, with anytime you do new brake pads, make sure you go through a bedding procedure. Typically, it's 5 or 6 stops from 50 miles an hour down to maybe 5. Don't come to a complete stop and don't drag the brakes. It's a firm brake. You want to get some heat in there, and you'll get a transfer layer from the pad to the rotors. Whoever you bought the pads from, you can look it up, and they typically have a preferred bedding procedure, though they're all pretty much the same. And then you let the brakes completely cool afterwards, and you're good to go. And that will just help make sure you get a good contact surface, you get a friction that's compatible between the pad and the rotor, and it will help minimize noise and vibration and stuff like that down the road. Other than that, pretty straightforward. This is one of the easiest brake jobs there are to do. This is really straightforward. So thank you, Ford, for that. If you have any questions about the process or the parts that I use, like I said, the Motorcraft rotors and pads, after I get some miles on it, I'll post an update down in the comments should I have any complaints, though I anticipate them being pretty quiet. But if you have any questions, hit me up in the comments. I'll help where I can. As always, hit the like button and subscribe if this sort of content is helpful to you. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time here on Scruff's Garage.